Is it Namaste or Sats for you, Kanta, or what is it?
I believe in all of them. I'll say Balaikum Salam to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
I don't have any particular one.
Yes, okay. I've got Ali, our regular, joining us as well, and there'll be one or two more later. Okay, we'll wait for Ala. Hello, Assalamu alaikum, Ala.
Hi, assalamu alaikum.
We are just about to start. Okay, so I'm going to thank all of you to join us for another Zoom event for MACFEST. And this time, I'm really excited to say we on the topic of films and filmmakers. And I have great pleasure in introducing our two amazing, enterprising, talented young filmmakers. And as you know, MACFEST is committed to nurturing, supporting, and celebrating new and fresh talent. These two guys got in touch with me about 2 or 3 months ago, wanted to see, and I thought, why not? Give them a chance. They just stepped out of university. They're making films. We're all about art and culture. Let's do it. And that's what we're going to do. But I'll wait for Basim, who's entering now, and he's from India. So I won't go any further. If it's the same Basim I know. Basim, are you there?
Long distance.
Okay, so Basim can join us in a while then. So I want to introduce these two guys formally, read out their bios that they sent to me. So first we have Stephen. Stephen, can you wave to everyone, please? That's Stephen. And he's got an interesting background. He is a filmmaker, born and raised in Essex to an Iranian father and an Italian mother.
Oh.
Growing up, he rapidly began developing an infatuation, that was his words, by the way, infatuation for cinema, for the likes of Abbas, Kiarostami, have I said it right? It's an Iranian name, obviously, and Bergman, everybody knows this name. During his time studying film at the Queen Mary University of London, he was able to make the transition from admiring the films of others to creating his own. It culminated in the creation of his and his peers' film production company named G22 Studios. So that is Stephen, ladies and gentlemen. Now I come to Suleiman Hamid. He is a British Pakistani filmmaker living in London. So can you say hello, Sully? That's Suleiman. Prefers to be called Sully, okay?
I don't mind either.
The ability to bring any of his imagination to life whilst creating characters and narratives that audiences can connect to is what inspired him to pursue films. Growing up, he was accustomed to foreign films in the form of Bollywood movie, just like myself. But it was while studying film at Queen Mary University of London, like his colleague Stephen, he was really drawn to narratives that explored other cultures and used the film medium to both making statements and educating audience. So ladies and gentlemen, you two as well, and Basim, I welcome Stephen and Sully. They'll tell you what they will talk about, and they really requested that we have an interactive session with you listeners. So we'll have plenty of time for you to ask them questions as we go along. This session is being recorded, as you can see, and later we will place it on our MACFEST YouTube channel where all the events are being showcased. Before I finish this formal part, I want to introduce Hale. Hale, say hello to everyone. Hale?
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Now, why I'm introducing Hale is she is going to be our next speaker. She's Iranian as well, a good friend of mine. She teaches at the MMU University, and it's going to be about food. And if you have time at the end, she can tell you a little bit about it. And then I want to introduce you another lovely lady, Kanta, who's on the screen at the top with me, and she's another good friend of mine. And I want to introduce her because she's going to be in a very special event celebrating South Asian Heritage Month. So just a little plug for our next events. So guys, over to you two now. So whoever wants to start, Stephen or Sully?
Well,
Sully. Yeah.
I was going to say, we just want to, before we do begin,
as Kesra had already said, we just want this to be as sort of open and interactive as possible. So at any point, if you have any questions or if there's any ideas that you have or anything like that, please feel free to jump in. And it's not, we don't just want to have an hour of us just talking at you and then a little bit of questions. We'd really like a lot of interaction with you guys. So please do feel free to ask questions and everything like that. So I guess the best place to begin is the film itself. Well, I guess before that, Stephen and I, how we met. So Stephen and I both met at Queen Mary, University of London. We were both studying film. We were in the same classes. And we found naturally that we started to we were drawn to the same kind of topics when it came to film. A lot of times it was darker themes. We weren't really attracted to comedy or romance or anything like that. It was more sort of drama or thriller. And so we started our production company after we left uni, and Stephen, he sent me a story. We talk a lot about so many different things, whether it's history and cultures and politics, everything like that. And Stephen was doing some research into Sufism. And so he sent me a fable that after we both read it, we just thought it was absolutely brilliant. And the interesting thing about this fable was because it was obviously an Islamic fable, and it had a very clear message to it in that there was a very clear idea of morality. This is wrong, this is right. And because both of us have this mixture of having backgrounds in the Islamic world, but also being born and raised here, there was a bit of gray area that we saw that we wanted to explore. And so that's what led us to the film that we're going to be making very soon, which is called In the Name of God. So just to briefly go over the plot of the film, so you guys are all familiar with it. It follows, we'll tell you our version. So it follows a crusader named Samuel who returns home after fighting for many years. And he is a very devout man. He loves God. He's a Christian man. And, you know, he's just absolute faith is unmatched by anyone. He really does love God. And he hears news that there is a group of people in the forest that are worshiping a tree. And so obviously he is absolutely enraged by this, because no one should be worshiping anything other than God himself. And so he marches down with his axe in hand to go and chop down this tree, and someone stops him, and the man reveals himself to be the devil. And so the devil convinces him and says, please, don't cut this tree down, because if you do, these people will be angry. They're not doing anything. They're just, they're not harming you. They're simply worshiping this tree. And if you were to cut it down, they will come after you. They'll come after your family. But Samuel will hear none of this. And so he's very easily able to overpower the devil, and he has him on the ground, and he's threatening him. And in a plea of desperation, the devil says, I will make a bargain with you. For every day that you don't cut down this tree, I will leave 2 gold coins underneath your bed. And so he thinks on this, and then he eventually agrees, because the devil says, look, if I'm lying to you, you can simply come back here tomorrow and you can chop down the tree. Look at how easily you were able to overpower me today. And so Samuel agrees. He goes home, goes to sleep, wakes up, and the next morning he finds 2 gold coins under his bed. So he goes and he does good things with this. He goes to donate some of it to the church. He gives some of it to the poor, and he doesn't spend much of it on himself. He just buys himself and his wife a nice bit of food for that evening to have a nice meal. The next morning he wakes up, and lo and behold, there is no gold coins underneath his mattress. So in a fury, he grabs his axe and he runs to go cut down this tree again. And again, the devil stops before him. But this time the devil is easily able to overpower him with just a touch of his hand. And Samuel goes flying through the woods and lands on the floor. And the devil says to Samuel, you will not cut down this tree, and you won't get any more gold coins. And this is it now. You see how much power I have over you. And so in defeat, Samuel is about to walk away. And just before he goes, he says, answer me this one question. How come 2 days ago I was able to easily overpower you, and yet today you beat me with such ease? And that's where the devil replies, 2 days ago, you came in the name of God, and today you came in the name of 2 gold coins. And so that really is the crux of the story. And Samuel will go home and think on this. And originally in the story, it was very black and white. It was just sort of, he was wrong for accepting the coin over doing God's will. Whereas the idea that Stephen and I were very interested with is the ambiguity around morality, because whilst it was wrong that he did take the money from the devil, he did good with it. He gave it to the church, he fed the hungry, he didn't spend it on materialistic items for himself and his wife. He just bought himself a nice, a meal, and that was about it. So that's really the sort of our spin on this fable, is to explore that and see what it means to be led by either a blind faith, or to be able to look at situations and try to weigh the differences on what is right and what is wrong.
In relation to this, a secondary but equally kind of present and important theme for us, going back to how this film kind of in many ways was a reflection and a melting pot of our two differing cultures between East and West, Islam and Christianity. This other in the forest, this was a big concept for us, the idea of the other, and this group in the forest who worships this tree. We considered in many ways, metaphorical stand-in for the East in its current presence in Britain. This for us kind of is very pertinent for today, because simply in the way Samuel's animosity towards this other in the forest, and this belief, this sectarian belief that these people have no right to be in this land and do not consider it, having any right to be here. We consider it to both have present, resonance, but also a historical one, because our thesis is quite simple, that these people, like ourselves, are not kind of outsiders coming in, but are a part of British identity, and in many ways have always been. So one of the ways in which we kind of tackle this and examine this is through this, simply through the central object of the tree itself. The fact that these worshippers are focusing and worship to the tree. It is this object of worship that we place at the centerpiece of this group, as it is something of the natural world. So we do not kind of present this, we present this group in many ways being a synonym for the, British earth. They arise with it. They're not kind of a foreign element, who lack a right to be here, to belong, to worship their own beliefs, but in many ways are kind of innately tied to the very kind of fabric of what is British.
So if we were to look at this as filmmakers, what really interests Stephen and I, and a number of different filmmakers, is film as a medium is able to incorporate so many other mediums of art. So you look at photography, and that's captured through framing and the way that you position certain objects within a frame. You look at portraits, and that's where we can get into color theory, looking at fashion design, which takes place in costume. So how certain characters dress, what colors are associated with them. There's cinematography, lighting, there's just this myriad of different forms of art which exist in their own mediums, but with film you are able to combine all of them together to create a really strong and powerful message. And so what we're hoping to do in this session is to kind of break down, not just in our films, but in other films, popular films that I'm sure many of you have seen, how filmic language can be broken down so you can understand what a filmmaker is trying to say about a character, about a group of people, or the narrative in general. So, for example, in our piece, we're going to be dressing the worshippers of this tree in red robes. Now, as Stephen's already mentioned, this group of people, they are a personification of the other, what it means to be something that you are not. Obviously, if you take into consideration, this is going to be a forest, so we've got earth tones of green and brown, colors that are somewhat muted but all go together. Then you've got this bright pop of red, and already just from the costume alone, if you forget anything that we've said to you, you see these figures dressed in red in a forest and you think something's out of place, they don't belong here, or they are the other. So that's an implementation of costume design and how that can quickly take someone out. And then we can take it a step further and think, what does the color red usually connote? Variety of things from lust to danger. Same thing when you look at, and these codes extend beyond film. So you look at in America, the stop signs, they're red, that indicates danger. That's something you have to be alert and look at. Traffic lights, red, that means stop. That's, you've got to, there's potential danger if you continue. And so you kind of associate red with danger and this myriad of different things that are pertinent to that with the red robes. If we're going to continue with costume design, then we've got the devil, who we imagine is going to be dressed in all black. This is a common thing that you will have seen in many things to connote darkness and potentially evil. For example, Star Wars, Darth Vader, very popular, everyone knows him. He is one of the most iconic villains, and what he is dressed in, head to toe, completely black. If anyone has seen The Seventh Seal, Death himself appears as a figure that is shrouded in entirely black. It's only the face that pops out as a contrast to that darkness. And so we're very much going down that route, because as soon as people see that figure that is shrouded in mystery and darkness, they will associate there's something not right here, or I can't get full information about this person, so I'm not very inclined to trust them. Stephen, you want to go to about next point?
Yeah, no problem. One point we were very fascinated on, and this goes beyond our film, but kind of tradition of Western filmmaking, is the depiction of the East. How is the East rendered in Western filmmaking? And this naturally is juxtaposed with a fascination for, Orientalism, the study which Edward Said kind of analyzed and broke down this history of, Orientalist discourse that's found in literature. And we take that model and examine it within a cinematic history context. One of the most kind of common tropes we find both in literature and cinema is the silent other, the other who is kind of a figure that is without an active voice to define itself, but is kind of defined by the Western perspective. So you see this throughout the kind of literary world, from Camus' novels in Algeria, which were always set with kind of, French protagonists, and in which the Algerians became blended into the background, lacking that kind of self-expression. In ours, we likewise almost mimic this in a kind of critical fashion. The group who live within the forest are voiceless. And when it comes to defining them, they do not define themselves. Samuel, our main character, defines them. He critiques them, paints them as something to be fearful of, paints them as something that is, almost a heresy in a way. And likewise, the devil steps in, and being another character who once again defends them, but it nevertheless goes back to that question: can the diaspora, can the social minority speak for themselves without being either spoken of by those who are against them, or spoken for, those who are in social positions of privilege? So that is one point that we incorporated into our film, this dynamic that we find, it's one of the more kind of cliche conventions of Orientalism in the West. Sully?
And to go off of this idea and to perhaps look at some of the more popular films within the media that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, and examine just how they do exactly what Stephen said. We're taking this idea and flipping it, but in order to know how we're flipping it, it's necessary to have a somewhat, basis of knowledge about the previous thing. So, for example, 300. I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's quite a popular film. It's about essentially the battle between the Spartan army and the Persians. And in this film, so it is very much, in a sense, the West versus the East. And the depiction of the Spartan soldiers, they are all white men that are tall and incredibly in shape. They are the epitome of what I guess beauty is when it's associated with men. They are very in shape. They are strong. They display all of these qualities that one would think are positive. They are brave. They are strong. They care for their children and for their wives. They are fearless in their journeys, and even in the face of battle, they proceed forward without hesitation. So that's how the Western side is being depicted. Contrast that to the Eastern side, Stephen.
Well, the East in 300 manifested through the Persian Empire. It is, for me, I find it very telling, even though it's based off a real historical event. I kind of align with the Howard Zinn school of thought, the great American intellectual, who, when he speaks on like American movies, he said specifically, there's a reason we see in the 21st century a lot of movies made by America focusing on World War II rather than, say, the Vietnam War. The reason it is to kind of build up a culture in which war is a kind of heroic act, always kind of done in the name of a righteous goal, while the Vietnam War, though popular during its time, has completely faded out because it reflects, I would argue, a much more common reality of war as something that is very often kind of having nefarious background, nefarious intent, and having unpleasant consequences when it is initiated. So likewise, I believe 300 as a film which depicts a Middle Eastern threat to European democracy. This is the notion that is kind of found in it. These Greek soldiers who consider themselves, they could say Europe, the home of liberty and democracy. And in opposition to this, you have kind of very explicitly Eastern threat who are faceless, who lack any, simply by that aesthetic, they lack any visible humanity. They are kind of defined by purely predatory instinct of attack and so forth. This is going back, I think, fundamentally to a talk Edward Said said, where he said the depiction of the East in many popular films is a group who are unable to kind of be reasoned with, negotiated with. They only understand the language of force. You have to give them a bloody nose to get the point across. And I think it is 300 as a film that is being chosen to be made today. It's kind of, in my opinion, its kind of questionable regressiveness. I think it is kind of continuing that culture, because what this culture permits is a certain way of dealing with the East in our politics, in our kind of, interventions, that allows it to be done so without as much backlash. It kind of normalizes a certain way of dealing with the East. And I think you even see this with our politics, the way we kind of speak of, say, Iran, a country, with flaws undoubtedly, but it is the kind of convention in the public mind, in the public conscience, that this is a country always a hand behind its back. You try and rationalize, you can't negotiate with them. That is their idea. And this is what Trump has, pulled out the deal Obama initiated, because it's based on this idea that's perpetrated in our films, our literature, that the East is somewhere, negotiating won't work. You try, they won't follow along. This was likewise, found during the Iraq War, so the Iraq at the time saying we don't have any weapons of mass destruction. It's lies, it's part of that culture of saying they're lying to us, they can't be negotiated with, we have to intervene violently. So this is what I believe 300 as the film made within this, in between these two between era of the Iraq War and now this current animosities that have been there for a while, granted, with Iran. It is a part of this, a cultural weapon to get people in a certain mentality, a certain political mentality.
It's arguably, film is potentially one of the widest consumed forms of propaganda, or it can be. It's just a question of being able to read it in a way that allows you to realize what you're being shown. So if we go, just continuing with this, the idea of 300, whilst it seems quite absurd on some level, if you hear about, you hear about 300 and then we're talking about the relationship between the US and Iraq and Iran and global politics and history, and you might think this doesn't, this is a film and you're talking about all these sort of much more important, deep things. It's important there to know that regardless of whether it's realized or not, there is very much a link between the two. And whilst we're not saying that a single film is going to cure the world or start a war, it's going to feed into the public's perception of certain people or certain religions, races, what have you. And with 300 alone, you just have this very clear divide between, here are the Spartan men, they wear just pants and a cape, they have all skin on show because we want to show they are men, they are human beings. And then you contrast that with this Persian army that are shrouded in long clothes that cover their entire arms. They wear faces so you can't see, and anytime their mask does come off, they have shapen faces and they often can't speak properly. They resort to growls and grunts. And it's this level of dehumanization that's just vaguely associated with this Persian army that can slowly potentially trickle its way into our minds, and whether it's conscious or subconscious, it builds on that expectation of a certain group of people being less human than another. Another really popular one, Indiana Jones. I'm sure many of you are all familiar with that. And what we're having the conversation a few weeks ago, I think, about the Indiana Jones films, and I have to be completely honest, it really did kind of break my heart because I loved watching them growing up, and I still do think that they're amazing films. But when you do analyze them, in particular, let's say Temple of Doom, the way that they depict people of foreign nationalities, specifically in this instance, people from India, it's quite terrible. On the very surface, if you aren't familiar with the film, Indiana Jones, he travels to a village in India and finds out that all the children from this village are being taken by someone, and the women are depicted as helpless. They're wailing, they're crying for their children, and they have no agency. They can't do anything. They're waiting for this savior who is Indiana Jones, this white Western man, to come along and save their children. And then the villains are this group of Indian men that use black magic that are, just, again, a step removed from reality. They are this complete other. And that can be seen as an allegory for religion, in the sense that someone may see how certain religions, Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, how they perform prayers, and they might think that's so alien, that's so strange, that's so different to how I do things. And that can be seen through the use of black magic in the film. It's that they are so far removed from my reality that they might as well just be magic and fantasy. And so even in that film, there's Indiana Jones, his sidekick is Short Round, who is a 12-year-old boy, a 12-year-old Chinese boy, and he doesn't have any family. And so it's Indiana Jones's job as the savior to take him in and shelter him and protect him, because he can't protect himself, or because even his parents couldn't protect him. And so he becomes this all-encompassing idea of hope. And in the end, obviously he does his job, but it doesn't change. You know, all the women at the very end, they're still thankful to Indiana Jones. Thank you so much for saving our children. We couldn't do this, or our husbands couldn't do this, or, you know, there's no one that we know that could do this, because what are we? We are just, you know, lowly Indians or whatever. But that's the message that the film is trying to bring across. And whether you realize it or not, or whether the intent is there, that is the message that it's bringing across. So as much as I loved watching them growing up, it was just quite heartbreaking to see that. There's the famous dinner scene when they all sit down at the palace to eat, and all the food is really strange and exotic, but on a different level. They have a large snake and they cut it open and they start eating the insides of the snake, or they have a monkey's brain, they start eating that. And it's so alien to a Western audience to see them, you know, eating soup with eyeballs in it and things like that. But then you've got the sort of this stereotypical cliche version of, you know, the Indian people who are there, who are saying, oh, this is lovely, this is great. And it just, again, works to create another level of division, of that separation between, look at how strange they are because they do things differently to us. And it just works to further sort of separate one from the other, and again, build up that level of expectation of them being the other. Yes.
Okay. Just to give you a break as well, thank you so much. We'll carry on. I want to pick up on what you've just been mentioning, and I'll share some of my experience in this field, because what's important for me, underlying messages, you're a filmmaker, but you're also culturally sensitive.
Yes.
About the films.
Yes.
And that's what you've been talking about. Also, your identity also figures in this as well.
Yeah.
I'll share mine just to explain. For example, when East is East was shown many years ago, lovely comedy, everybody enjoyed it, but I didn't, because the comedy was at our expense, because the stereotyping was happening, the cliches were there, and that's when my personal identity, my cultural identity came into play. For my white colleagues, it was a good laugh, wonderful. It was farce. For me, it was more than that. I felt uncomfortable. So that's one example. The other example is I myself, I'm a script writer. I've got a master's degree in it. And as part of my degree, we had to write, either a drama serial or adaptation of something. And I adapted my first novel, The Holy Woman. It was budgeted at the film for 90 minutes at about 20 million or something.
Right.
All of that happened. But you know what? I was reluctant to part with it. Main reason being, if it's taken up by the Western audience, they'll be stereotyping Islam, Muslim women, etc., etc. And you know what? I sat on that film, never done anything, because my conscience wouldn't let me. I thought, I'm not falling into that trap. And I was very, very sensitive to that. The third thing I want to mention is, as a result of my course, actually, I did the course to write drama serials, because films are very powerful, as you know. Images are powerful. But for me, it wasn't just the images, it was the message that you get across.
Definitely.
My novels are published right across the world. But in Pakistan, for example, where I originally come from, not many people can read English. Not many people can afford 500 rupees for a novel. So really, they were not reaching the audience. The drama serial in a developing country is a powerful tool. It reaches millions overnight.
Yes.
And so I wrote it in English. It was downloaded, made into screenplay. But why I'm mentioning is this. While I was writing this, I was culturally sensitive to the topic, the material. In an English film, you have love scenes, open sex scenes, kissing. I was writing for a different audience. And I remember writing a scene, a very powerful, passionate scene between a man and a woman. They didn't even touch. I had to think of other ways of expressing it. So I share this to show you that your identity, your background does feature in what you produce. And
Yes.
from what I hear from you talking about it, that seemed to be one of your aims, your objectives,
Absolutely.
to challenge those stereotypes. For
Yeah.
example, most films always stereotype Muslims as in a negative light.
Yeah.
And of
100%.
course, as Stephen has been saying, the Iranians are all the baddies these days. They've been demonized since the revolution. And if you go to Iran, I have lots of Iranian friends. I've been watching The Art of Persia. Well, it's a totally different story. I have a friend who's come, went everywhere in Iran, and she had a wonderful time. So they're stereotyped, they're images, and these images are very powerful.
Mm.
And the one, Sully, you mentioned about the snakes and all of that is literally playing into that. I'm
Exactly.
sorry, I just thought I'd give you a bit of a break and
No, perfect.
share what I know. So you carry on.
No,
If
that
there's
is,
anybody else who want to come in at this stage, ask question, please, they would welcome that.
Okay, I'll ask a question.
Yeah,
It's me.
Denise?
sure.
It's really interesting what you're saying, guys. You know, particularly around 300. I've not seen it myself, but it seems like the sort of film 16-year-old boys taking time off from the computer games would watch.
Yeah.
You know, these films are just, I guess, fantasies, even if they've got some sort of historical backdrop. They're taking it out of context. And there is a little bit, I see from what you're saying, sort of race baiting going on in there. But then, you know, I turn a mirror to you guys and say, when you were, for example, when you were brought up in an Iranian household, were the Persians seen as, you know, cleaner than clean? They were, you know, very successful. They won their battles. And in some ways, do you find 300 insulting because it eats into the values of your history and how you see your history? I'm just being provocative here.
I know, it's a very fair point.
Denise, yeah.
Thank you for that question. It's a fair point. What's interesting, I would say, in my kind of upbringing, because without going into too many kind of personal details about my father, but it was very much in many ways, these kind of media actually eroded away at my, I think on a subconscious level, eroded away at my pride of Iranianness, because I was at an age where I couldn't think quite critically of this. So I could see family members being affected by it in that way, especially being kind of mixed race between Italian and Iranian kind of family members. Growing up, I would find many children would take a kind of a fetishistic interest in the Italian side, but the Iranian side was a silent, like kind of taboo in a way. Like for those who knew it, knew of Iran, they only knew bad things about it, and those who didn't know, well, that's kind of, you know, the proof is in the absence, you know. So those were the two kind of forces I was raised around. Either people didn't know what it was, which kind of led to the unspoken assumption just Iran is a kind of absence of substance, or people do know and they just don't talk about it because what they do know is what they are brought up on. And though my father was certainly, you know, kind of adamant of trying to kind of assist in many ways, pushing against these stereotypes, I think nonetheless he himself, because he was here since he was 14, he himself was kind of a victim of them likewise. So from that kind of second generation perspective, I think it's been almost a familial kind of burden. So it's ironically kind of just continued to. I finally, as I've kind of got older and started to think critically and reading people like Edward Said and post-colonial theorists like Frantz Fanon, Stuart Hall, Ali Shariati, and so forth, I finally was able to shed whatever kind of assumptions I have been kind of carrying with me. And it's what makes me confident when I talk about almost like the effect of films like 300, is that I never was consciously aware how they were influencing me. They just kind of blend in with your subconscious thinking and slowly kind of birth themselves into conscious attitudes, but you can never trace it to its source. That's the kind of effect that culture, whether literature, music, film, has on you. It's it's why it's one of the most effective forms of propaganda, because it influences you without you being aware of it. And that's the most dangerous form of manipulation, because it's very hard to counteract. And that's, I think, one of the ways of dealing with it, you know, being conscious of it.
I think that is a big point that Steve and I, it always comes up in all of our conversation, is this idea of education. And we think, you know, as the older we've got, the more we've been able to educate ourselves on the history of not just, you know, British history, but also our own histories, Iranian history, Pakistani history. And the thing that we strive for is, in terms of film, we're trying to not obviously feed into these stereotypes, but allow people to educate themselves, whether it's through film or external research, on their own histories and the history of the world around them, because we wouldn't for one second want to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, the Persian Empire was completely perfect, or everything that Pakistan has ever done has been completely perfect. As is with all nations and religions and parts of the world, it's important to know, obviously, the positive sides of the things that, you know, Europe history has done for the world, but at the same time, not just shunning the negative sides of that, and, you know, saying, oh, that didn't exist, or we never did that, or we don't talk about that. I think it's important to bring it to the light and look at it, because throughout history, we learn from all of our mistakes, or we'd hope that we learn from our mistakes. And so if we are to never, you know, examine the mistakes, then how are we to not fall into the same trap again? So I think that is sort of one of the other big things, is that it's not necessarily about, in 300, the depiction of the Iranian or the Persian army as being negative, taking away from the brilliance of certain aspects of the Persian Empire, but rather it's just focusing on the bad, but also we wouldn't just want it to focus just on the good. So it's about that sort of balancing of the line where you can see everything in the most objective way, rather than just feeding into the negative or the positive.
I think it's most kind of apparent when we compare, if we take like Persian Empire briefly and compare it, how are other European empires compared to in film. So, you know, Persian Empire was trying to invade Greece. This is considered a threat to our democracy. This is blah, 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 blah. But when later on the Roman Empire, you know, something innate to Europe came and conquered Greece, you know, defeated the Spartans. Now, this is, you know, fundamentally in the same spirit of what the Persian Empire was previously trying to do. But when we look at the depiction of the Roman Empire in films, you know, even when they are the antagonists, because they have certainly been the protagonists in countless old epics, even when they are the antagonists, like in Spartacus, like Kubrick's film with Kirk Douglas, or Gladiator, they are a multi-dimensional being. Some Romans are flawed but intelligent. Other Romans are lovely. They are considered, they are humanized. They are shown not as one holistic, like singular being, but as many people, some good, some bad. And I think in the depiction of the East, so rarely is this done. They are just one faceless, interchangeable mass. No nuance, no kind of differing shades of being. And I think that this definitely kind of affect, you know, how we see, you know, like how we interpret the world around us. You know, the way our empires, our history is kind of romanticized in certain ways and given a bit more kind of leeway compared to other histories. I think kind of it almost leads to a kind of culture where the East, if it behaves, if there's something bad that happens with a man who is, say, of Middle Eastern background, it's considered just that's what we expected to happen. And there's no kind of, but to compare it to another one, when there was that attack in Australia, in a mosque, I believe, and very famously, the Daily Mail and the Sun had a picture of him as a child and said, this angelic boy became this man. And people ridiculed it. And there was backlash because how come this European man suddenly is, he is the angelic boy, but you never hear this language if someone dared to do something like that in a church, it's madness. But I think that comes from our culture. We are not used to seeing ourselves like that. So if something like that happens from someone,
the outlier.
Yeah, exactly, the outlier. But if someone of kind of an Arab background does that, well, that you get the typical response of the UKIP EDL lot who'd be like, well, that's what we expected. You see, this is a kind of evidence of what our literature and films have been telling us for so long, that that's just what they are all like. So I think that is the interconnection between those two, mediums.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any questions, please, or comments?
Yes. Can
Hannah?
I ask you a question?
Yes, you can comment,
yes.
question, whatever.
Thank you very much for that, kind of like storytelling and that update and what you're doing. My question is, how much do you think you're inspired by a holistic approach to filmmaking, such as poetry, reading? It's definitely come Abbas Kiarostami, and I don't know, Solly, you probably have your own people like Taste of Cherry, and kind of all those really difficult concept being addressed by directors such as Kiarostami. But I'm also kind of really keen for you guys to tell me a little bit about Hollywood in general, because how they portray Chinese people is probably just as bad. How they portray Black people, how and actually how much do you think is about representation at the top? We don't have filmmakers, like you guys. And actually, if we did have more filmmakers like you guys in Hollywood or anywhere else in the world, I don't know if Hollywood is ready for you two, but if we did have filmmakers like you guys, things would be very different. But I heard about Black Panther, and Hollywood didn't think it would be successful, and yet it's been the most successful film, kind of superhero film, or cartoons as well. I remember growing up and watching Simpsons. Now I watch it and I actually cringe. So it's not about being politically correct, but it really is. Now I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so wrong. Anyway, I've asked about 15 questions in one, but whatever you can tell me, I would be really interested to hear.
I think Patsy wants to come in as well. She can ask and then you can answer both. Yeah. Patsy?
Yeah, it builds on that really. That my sister lives in Mexico, and I've read a lot of Latin American authors, and there's quite a rich Latin American film heritage. And I love the way their films are so different to Hollywood films. They're not about big blockbusters. There's a number that I've seen that are deeply moving because they're about day-to-day details and life and how people interact. And what was the one? There was one that won the Academy Award about the maidservants in Mexico City. But there's one I watched that stayed in my mind a long time about a tiny village in Colombia, which I think was the film director's hometown. And it rained all the time, and it was this really incredibly moving film, but so different from what Hollywood thinks of as an interesting film. And, that's different countries in Latin America seem to share that focus on real human life more, to me.
Okay, boys.
Yeah, I think the thing with film is that regardless of whether you're looking at it from an artistic point of view or you're going from a producer point of view, so the finance, which is something that inevitably runs the entirety of Hollywood, it all comes down to one thing, which is audience. And I think that's sort of where the biggest issue is, because the audience have been fed this constant stream of media that perpetuates certain ideas, and it's all masqueraded in fantasy and sci-fi and these other different genres that help you just take one step back from reality. So it's a way of sharing those messages, whether or not they're inadvertent or actually realized, but at the same time still being able to say, oh, but it's just it's a sci-fi film. This isn't we're not talking about the depiction of a certain religion or anything like that, because it's sci-fi. It's removed from reality, and so I think the main issue really is that audiences, and particularly Western audiences, I agree very much with the idea of film is something that you can, if you want, you can just go and forget about all of your problems for 2 hours. You're having a bad day, you're having a good day, whatever it is, any issues, you can just go sit down for 2 hours straight and you just watch something, and whether or not it resonates with you, it's just something entertaining, something to occupy your mind and just take you away from whatever you might be dealing with. And so with that comes the danger of entertainment sort of for entertainment's sake. And so you fall into this trap of, oh no, the films have to be like this, they have to be these big spectacle pieces, rather than looking deeply at the sort of everyday life, as you had mentioned. Wonderful or I say documentary, it was just a film, an Italian film called Le Quattro Volte, which means the four seasons or four changes. And it's an entirely silent film, and it just looks at life in this very small Italian town, divided into 4 sections. And it was so wonderful and so far removed from what we'd expect of Hollywood. But the reason that wouldn't be made in Hollywood is because it comes down to the audience. They wouldn't find it something interesting. And so this is where film, like, we kind of begin to branch out of film as a medium and begin to basically share these ideas or get people interested outside of film, because it's quite rare that you're just going to show someone this film and something that's going to spark this change where, oh, in fact, I decide I like a completely different section of cinema now. I think it's having conversations and getting people interested in the ideas first, and then that way this can expand beyond just film and can work its way into art, or even a basic conversation with someone that you've never met before. It's focusing on the interest before you reach, film or anything like that. Stephen, is there anything you can? Yeah.
And I was just going to add, I do definitely think in our culture there is an absolute need for more diverse filmmakers to arise and express their backgrounds, because there is now this isn't. I feel like the need to preface this isn't that there isn't an ability for certain, whether say a white European filmmaker to understand other cultures. It can happen, though granted, if you look at Hollywood, it tends not to happen. But for example, it happened one night, which was a great film about African-American culture, which was one of Malcolm X's favorite films, was made by a white director who's, forgive me, his name has escaped me, but a great film. But these are it's not a matter of kind of stopping, filmmakers from making films about other cultures, but it is simply the ratio is so disgustingly lopsided. For every one like Middle Eastern or Latino filmmaker or filmmaker from a kind of West Indian or African background, there are like 10, 20 white European, white American filmmakers, directing pictures based on their experience. And the fact is, so many of them, most of them will not understand the nuances of that lifestyle, because it's something not easy to kind of come to grips with unless you're truly living it. And the thing is, many filmmakers who are because film, unfortunately, is a very, like many art forms, I suppose, but film particularly is a very unhappy art form in how much money is attached to it, so it's going to projects which many think might be profitable, rather than what they believe will be kind of a philosophical statement. You don't have that many artists in cinema, or mainstream cinema at the very least. So I suppose those are the two kind of, if I had to kind of surmise in a kind of concise format, more filmmakers are kind of minority backgrounds. And I suppose just a new culture to be birthed, which puts art before money, because I think it is money that creates this kind of underrepresentation, and also creates these pictures which lack depth, because depth sometimes just isn't profitable. If people like seeing the broad strokes and that's profitable, then that's also the issue, you know, that people do not like to see the complexities. They like to see the easily understood. So yeah, that's just my stance on it.
It is, yeah, our job to, as Stephen said, definitely, you know, considering art first, but as filmmakers who hold all of this really dear to our hearts, and knowing the workings of Hollywood, it's our job to, as hard as it might be, to package this and to show Hollywood and the mainstream that there is an interest in this and that audiences will come if you make films like this. So all of this time is us trying to work and to create a film that has strong messages, that isn't stereotypical, that, you know, does right by the people that we're trying to depict and is a very honest and genuine representation of them, but in a way that is going to grip audiences. And then that way Hollywood can see, oh, from their point of view, if they're looking at film funding and for just money making, basically, they'll see that, oh, it can be profitable, and that's where hopefully we can take the next steps to move forward.
Ali and Stephen, can I introduce a very special guest today who joined us, Yasmin, all the way from Pakistan. Can you believe it? Karachi. Everybody say hello to Yasmin, mashallah. Last time I met her was at Karachi Literature Festival. She's a literary person, academic person, and she's made it. And before that, we had Basil. I think he's just gone. He was there from Kerala. So you can boast you had people from abroad, okay? So Yasmin, you have been a bit late, but these two lovely guys have been sharing about their life, their experience as young filmmakers, and in particular relating it to their own background, their own personal interest. And we've been at that stage where we're asking questions. So if you've got any question to ask, please feel free to.
Yeah.
Okay, Jasmine.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Okay. Patsy, you had a question. Patsy had this question. I'll read it to you, Sully. It says, with new founders of film, for example, Netflix, does that change things, do you think?
Definitely. I think because it changes things in a way that filmmakers who are not in the circle of Hollywood or even associate, people who are in the circle of Hollywood, things like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and all of these sort of streaming services, they allow people who usually wouldn't have a voice to have one and to spread it to, potentially millions of people, because I think most people now will have Netflix over even regular, Sky or anything like that. So I think they are such important and strong, powerful tools, because you think there is a lot on Netflix that you've never seen, but that is the work of people who are independent, who wouldn't get the funding from Hollywood, and this gives them the chance to really say what they want to say in a way that's also meaningful. It's not just going to get shunned to the side, but people will be able to view it whenever they want. I think obviously the potential issue is that with Netflix, you do still have to pitch to them, and so it's very much up to them. And this is where you sort of get the potential issues, that if they fall into the same trap of Hollywood of, oh, this film will be profitable, so we'll bring this one on, then of course it's just this Netflix will be another extension, another arm of Hollywood in a sense. But if they make the right decisions and they really do look at content first, because in the world of filmmaking, what Steve and I believe is that narrative comes first, content is king, and that's what we're trying to strive for. And so if Netflix are able to look at that rather than the sort of monetary value of films, then we could potentially be in a really wonderful position where you hear some just incredibly interesting stories from people that you would have never had the chance to do so in the first place.
I think it's also, just to kind of build up the two things Sully was saying, I think in relation to Netflix, I think it is still in the hands of the public. And we have to speak about change in the filmmakers' mentality. I think it's a change that needs to happen in the public's mentality. Like a while back, Ridley Scott said a very crass comment that, very stupid. But he said something like, when you're making Exodus, I think Gods and
Kings, yeah.
Yeah, Gods and Kings. Mm-hmm. He was challenged for not having, an Egyptian or Arab cast playing the central characters. He said he had Christian Bale and someone else.
John
and he said,
Egerton. I think it was John. Yeah.
I think so. And he said something really ignorant, like, well, I can't, make a $100 million film with an actor called Mohammed so and so from such and such. And that was profoundly ignorant. But in an odd way, I think people focused too much on the comment. And the central point, I think, that came under that, if he had just said it a bit better, is that will the public watch these films? Because I think that's the issue here as well. I think Spike Lee said the same thing. Like, when it comes to African-American cinema, the public must ask for more, not just ask, watch it. Because sadly, if we're in a capitalist system, profitability comes above all else. It may be very socially conscious, very woke, but if it's not making money, it won't be made. If underrepresented groups make films and the people who demanded these films to be made do not watch them, this kind of emphasis must be put on both viewer and filmmaker, because it is kind of interlinked, and one cannot kind of thrive without the other's effort in kind of wanting to see it.
I've had 2 more questions personally to ask, but is there anybody else who'd like to ask one before I ask mine? Yes, Kantas, you need to unmute yourself, Kanta, first. We can't hear you. Kanta, we can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to congratulate the young men for doing something which is much required in this society, because it's really still very majority based. And the fact is that because they come from diverse backgrounds and they've also had the experience of living in this country, they've got a multi-dimensional outlook. So I'm just wondering how they can promote their films more, because it requires so much money. I have known some good filmmakers from minority cultures from Kerala who ended up teaching because they couldn't get enough funding to make films. In fact, one of them, I'm not going to name names, had even won the Camera d'Or award from France. And even then, a lot of his work went, it wasn't just taken up because he didn't have the funds behind him. And I'm just wondering if it would be better if our 2 filmmakers, promising filmmakers, get together with others and form some sort of larger group to get some more funding, or find an organization which focuses more on their work. Because in this talk, we heard a lot more about the films they have seen and which might have played some part in what they have created. But I would have liked to hear more about their own film. I mean, we heard the introduction and it seems interesting. It does question many stereotypes, including religious stereotypes. But I just want more of a window on their own work. And thank you for introducing them to me.
I think the reason that we started our own production company was to kind of mitigate that problem, because it's very common if we were to rely on a lot of outside funding that we're just not going to get it. So that's why we created G22, because that gives us all of the power to make the films that we want to make. We're able to distribute it ourselves, and that it gives it more legs to stand on, because as an organization and a group of people coming together, we're more likely to get funding from certain places, because they see that it's not just a singular person, but they have many behind that. And we are luckily, in a sense, seeing some strides towards more positive movements. So, for example, the BFI, the British Film Institute, they are looking for people who come under BAME, so Black, Asian, or minority ethnic, and they're looking specifically for people from that background to fund, because they often go without having a voice, and it is much easier if you are either born in Britain, you are British, or from the US or anything like that. It's much easier. So we're seeing that. Obviously, there's still some debate over that, because there is a big question of the difference between diversity and representation, and it seems as though diversity is filling this quota. So that's the BFI saying, oh, let's just include some of these people from this background so that just so that people can't get angry at us because we've done it. But the difference between that and representation is, I want to give these people the platform to really show their own true culture in the way that it truly is lived.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, yeah. You're on mute, Kesa, if you're talking.
Pardon?
Yeah, Kash.
Okay.
Right, I have to unmute myself. Right, my question is this: what's the next step for your film now? You talked about the theme, the topic, etc.
Yeah.
What are you actually doing with it? I want to hear the nitty-gritty bits of the film.
So currently we've got all of our actors down. We've sifted through all of, we put up some casting calls, and we've had all of their auditions, and we've got them to read specific parts of the script and everything. So we've got them all down and they're all happy. We're making sure, obviously, with filming, we have to be on top of guidelines when it comes to things like COVID and all that stuff.
Yeah,
so we've given out all of that information to them. I think tomorrow, Stephen and I are going to do some location scouting. So we're going to go to the location where we've decided and set up a few things and have a look there. And then following on from that, I think later on in the week, we're going to meet up with our cinematographer, and we're going to take him to the location.
So what's the location? Remind us about the location.
So it's all set in a forest.
And where's this forest?
The forest that we're using is in Essex. It's in Brentwood, so that's very close to where I live. And the main reason for that is quite practical, just because the closer we get to London, the busier that parks and forests are going to be, and we can't have background sounds, especially with it being a medieval film. You can't have the sound of a plane going over or traffic or anything like that. So it probably made sense to kind of go a bit out of the way to do that.
Okay.
Other than that, I think we have to start getting our shot list and everything together, and that's something we're going to go through with our cinematographer. And then I think the first week of August is when we're penciled to actually shoot. It should be about 4 days, and then after that, we've got until about September to get the final edit done. And then beyond that, we're going to be looking at just submitting it to a lot of film festivals and tailoring it and making sure that it's really well suited to all the things that we submit to.
Mm-hmm. So what role do you play then? Are you directors, producers, or are you a bit of everything with this film?
And we're both directors of this piece. Our producer is a girl called Linnea, who is Norwegian, and she's currently in Norway at the moment. So that's a part to it, kind of having Skype and Zoom is very useful at the moment in that endeavor. But those are the main roles in terms of the administrative kind of top of the filmmaking process. Me and Sully kind of, as directors, our main, I suppose director is such a all-encompassing term, but like our main kind of goals at the moment are figuring out the visuals of the film, like how we want to shoot it, light it, and this is still because of these productions, because on top of like getting funding for in relation to our previous conversation about funding for BAME filmmakers, it is also kind of paired with just a need to just go out there and make films, to just kind of not be held back by any limitations. So for us, it's not just directing, it's also a bit of producing. Like for every decision, we are counting our budget, how much money would this day cost? So we're paying actors like £120 a day or something along those lines. How many days can we have before, how many extra days can we have before it goes over budget, and then comes out of our own wallets, it is the questions we are asking at this stage. And it's very reflective of, just the position we're at career-wise at the moment, is kind of going each rung at a time So that's currently our responsibilities, I'd say.
I think it's quite different from how it would be when, you know, if we reach a level where we are directors in sort of a more Hollywood sense, where that is, you're just focusing on sort of the creative aspects and directing the actors and the cinematographers. Whereas at this stage, so early on, I think something that Stephen and I have both been trying to do is, as directors, you should have such a wonderful knowledge of every single aspect of film. You're not going to be perfect at everything, but the more that you know about sound and cinematography and lighting, the easier it is to communicate with your crew as to what you want. And so I think this time right now, and sort of as we're moving forward, is the periods where Steve and I are just going to get stuck into absolutely every job. Like, whilst our official titles are writer, director, because we both co-wrote together and we're going to be directing together, we are also dipping into other things as well.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody who hasn't had a chance to ask? We only have a few minutes left. So, yes, Jinsila?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask why the name G22 Studios.
I can't hear you, Jinsila. Can you say that? I'll come back to you, Yasmin.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask why the name G22 Studios.
Oh, G22 Studio. Where did you get that name from?
So every week, we used to meet up at university, and that's where sort of, you know, before we became G22, we were just meeting and we hadn't really come up with the idea yet. And then we were thinking, okay, we're going to start a production company. Okay, first thing we need is a name. And because that was our hub, that's the place that we always met, was one of the editing suites. I just went and opened the door, and on the front, that room was called G22. And so that was G22 Studios.
Nice.
Okay. I've got one little quick question. What Barbara says, what do they think of Spike Lee?
I think he's a fantastic filmmaker. I think my favorite film of his is Malcolm X, which is this kind of 3-hour epic. It's strange. I think people know of it, but I think people, cinephiles, you know, film fans who consider themselves highbrow, and neglect just how incredible that film is. There's a reason Scorsese rated it as one of the top 10 films of the 90s. It is, I'd recommend everyone here to watch it, especially in this current climate, because it is one of the most powerful films I've seen.
Okay, thank you. Yasmin, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, my daughter Sarah Farid, she is interested in asking. Actually, we got delayed because of internet problems.
Okay.
And miscalculated the time as well. We went with
everybody. Reminder: Yasmin is sitting in Karachi at this moment. What time is it there? 10 o'clock?
Yeah, it's 9. It's 9.
Oh, 9. Okay, so your daughter can ask the question then.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, because we missed the beginning part, so I was just wondering if you could describe in like a line or two what it's about, and also like after the film festivals, will you be releasing it online or somewhere we can watch it?
Yeah. So keep it short, okay, guys. Short. We're running out of time now.
Mm-hmm. Short, in a single line, it's about a devout woodcutter who has an encounter with the devil that puts his morality into question.
And when would it be released, and how and where? If you.
So I think we'll be looking to release sometime around October. And when you submit to certain film festivals, they don't let you put it online. So we have to make sure that all of those are done. But I think I'm hoping around January time, we're going to be able to put it online, Vimeo, YouTube, all sort of online places there. And we can, of course, send the link out to everyone.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. I need to call in Halle for a minute and Kanta for a minute. So I want to officially say thank you. I really learned a lot and it was entertaining.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you the very best of luck. And we recorded this. It will be on our YouTube channel, so people who missed it can watch us again. So now I want to again welcome to Yasmin. I'm really delighted that you are joined. And before that, guess what? Your neighbors were here, India. And Basim from Kerala joining us. He just left before you came. And I've got Panta at the top as well. She's from India, mashallah. So I have great pleasure to introduce Halle. Halle is going to be your next speaker, ladies and gentlemen. You will talk to Halle or hear Halle on 3rd of August. And Halle, tell us about it in short term, because I have to talk to Kanta as well in a minute.
Sure. Well, how do you follow two passionate filmmakers with food? But my session is going to be how food connects us all. So it's going to be creative. I want everybody to bring in their own recipes.
Really?
I want to inspire people with the spices, saffron, barberries, bring in some, you know, kind of Persian cooking. I haven't nailed it down completely, but I'm in the middle of my kitchen. So you might actually get a session, a cooking session, but I am a scientist. I'm a food scientist. So you will hear about some of the benefits of turmeric, saffron, you know, kind of oregano, and any questions that you might have about the color of food and everything else. And actually, Kesra has been fantastic trying to chain me for that date. So, you know, please ask anyone who wants to come, you know, and I run many social, you know, kind of projects around Manchester and globally. So we are experts at kind of like getting people to open up and have fun and excitement with food. So I like to think that we can get everybody kind of like off their chairs and really kind of excited about food if you're not already.
She has done it. You pitched yourself really well. Thank you so much. So now I want to come back to, so Halle's session is on the 3rd of August. And then before that, we have another session, Remember Srebrenica, remember the genocide of the Bosnian people? We've got a special event on the 28th, and please, all of you, join us. We will send you the link in due course, and all this information will come through our newsletter. Finally, we have also a very special event. It's very special because it's different. We have partnered with South Asian Heritage Month, and MACFEST is doing an art and culture bonanza. So we will have about 9 speakers in 1.5 hour session, poetry, music, art, cake cutting, garments, artifact, you name it, we're doing it. And one of those speakers I have got today here, and Kanta. Kanta is a novelist, she's a poet, and she's a wonderful artist. Kanta, in 1 minute, tell us what you're going to be doing that day. She'll have about 10 minutes.
You've given me 10 to 12 minutes to speak.
On that day, not today.
So I thought the best thing would be for me to talk about the artworks that I have made in India and Pakistan. Wonderful. And talk about the symbolism and the images, the colors I've used, and after my general introduction to my art. So I think that would cover the 10 minutes.
And also you said you're going to read a poem of yours. You're a poet?
Yes, I'll read a poem in introduction to my art, because I'll just show the book which has my poetry and my paintings.
Okay.
So that should take a couple of minutes.
Okay. This session is going to be on 15th of August. You will get the information. It's on Saturday. In fact, it's India's Independence Day. And we wanted it over weekend, Saturday, from 2 o'clock to 3:30. So you get all the information. Are there any comments? Anybody want to say anything before we finish for today? Normally these sessions are from 4 to 4:30. So we still got 4 or 5 minutes if anybody wants to comment.
Yeah, I felt the session was good. We got a lot of information and enthusiasm from the young men about what they intend doing. And I wish them good luck, because film world isn't easy to survive for long. And hope that they go far in their careers. So I enjoyed attending the session, and of course getting used to the Zoom app. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Yeah. So again, Yasmin, thank you so much. Will you join us next time? I want you there, okay? If you can.
Yes,
okay, everybody. So goodbye until next time.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for that. Was wonderful. Well done.